Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to AJ 101 Criminal Law Online. And tonight's lecture is going to be on Chapter 17. Now, Chapter 17 is not that long, but it has a multitude of code sections and definitions. And so it's going to be incumbent upon you to go through your textbook and kind of look at those definitions and get a better understanding on how they fit into what we're talking about, because I'm not going to have a chance to go through each and every single definition in this book. Now, what I will do as part of this, I will post an additional PowerPoint that will show you photographs of illegal narcotics or seizures, narcotics officers doing their job, maybe in some videos, some street stings and things like that. So I'll post some more information to help you add some context, along with maybe a couple of video links to show what some of these substances are doing to your body and your brain. And again, we're going to have some differences of opinion possibly on things like when we talk about marijuana and stuff like that. And now with the changes in the marijuana laws, a couple of these sections may be a little bit different when it comes to marijuana, so we'll try to identify some of those. But keep in mind that, again, I'm going to post some other things that'll kind of help you draw some context to what we're talking about. So most drug crimes are found in Division 10 of the Health and Safety Code, beginning with Section 11000, which is actually entitled the Uniform Controlled Substances Act. Now, this act covers pretty much everything. It covers such offenses as possession, sale, transportation, manufacturing, furnishing, administering, possession of drug paraphernalia, under the influence, cultivation, etc., of controlled substances. Now, along with the Health and Safety Code, you might find a few alcohol-related or drug-related codes in the Penal Code and the Vehicle Code, and even in the Business and Profession Code, but for the most part, they are all going to be found in the Health and Safety Code. And that Uniform Controlled Substances Act that I spoke of also, not only does it cover the illegal issues relating to controlled substances, but it also covers the lawful ones. So, for example, treatment of addicts or requirements for prescriptions, and then offenses and penalties. So that's where you're going to find a lot of information. And if you put that information, that Uniform Controlled Substances Act, put that in your web browser, Google it or what have you, and you will be able to get the exact verbiage, and it'll tell you a lot of information. Now, as we move further into this chapter, like I said, there's a whole lot of definitions, and we're not going to go through each and every one of them. Part of this is going to be up to you to kind of take a look and read what those are. And you can look at the bottom here and see that it's everything from defining what a drug is to a dangerous drug to what does it mean to dispense, and things like that. So read some of those, okay, as we're starting off here on page 259. Now, definitions that come to mind that you really need to know outside of some of these other ones would be things like tolerance. What is tolerance? Well, tolerance is a state in which the body's tissue cells adjust to the presence of a drug. The term tolerance refers to a state in which the body basically becomes used to the presence of a drug in a certain amount, okay, in a certain given amount, and eventually fails to respond to ordinarily effective doses. So hence, increasingly larger doses are necessary to produce desired effects. So that's how it kind of starts. So at the beginning, you know, when you introduce a drug into your body and you're going to be using it over and over and over, whatever amount you're using is okay for a while until your body doesn't respond the way you want it to, and then you have to increase the dose in order to reach the desired effect or result. And that's how kind of a habit starts which leads us into that psychological dependence or that habituation or habit, which is the result of repeated consumption of a drug, which produces a psychological dependence, if you will, but not a physical dependence. So the result of repeated consumption of a drug which produces psychological but no physical dependence. The psychological dependence produces a desire, not a compulsion, if you will, to continue taking drugs for the sense of improved well-being. And then that pushes us further into the physiological dependence, if you will, or the addiction. And this occurs when a person cannot function normally without repeated use of a drug. And if the drug is taken away, that person has a severe physical and psychic reaction or disturbance. So those are important definitions for you to kind of know as we start to move through. Excuse me. Now, when you look on page 260, you'll see an area, it's 17.3 and so on. I think it'll go from page 260, 261, and even through 262 that talks about and lists a bunch of drugs. Now, I'll chart these for you later on in this lecture, but for now, those pages have kind of a list of pretty much a lot of the different substances that we're going to be talking about. We're not going to go through each one, like I said, independently, but we'll start with opiates, psychedelics, stimulants, depressants, controlled substance schedules, schedules 1 through 5 of the Health and Safety Code, which are 11054 through 11058. This lists controlled substances formerly identified as narcotics or restricted dangerous drugs. The most dangerous substances or highest potential for abuse are listed in Schedule 1 and 2. The slightly less dangerous substances or milder or less addictive are listed in Schedules 3 through 5. Some drugs are listed in more than one schedule depending upon the amount of opiates that they contain, but this is how they list narcotics and dangerous drugs under the Controlled Substances Act. So they have these schedules, and you can look down here, and in your book you can actually get a larger view of those types of schedules. So you see Schedule 1 is Health and Safety Code 11054, 2 is 11055, and so on all the way through 11058. So here's kind of a quick look at those that you might at least know by name and kind of recognize. Remember Schedule 1, so HNS 11054 has within its schedule cocaine base, hallucinogenics, heroin, LSD, marijuana, mescaline, methaqualone, opiates, peyote, and GHB. And so these are those types of drugs that will fall within the Schedule 1 area. Now, again, don't forget, I'm going to post another PowerPoint to go along with this that will have some photos of some of the drugs. I may narrate it, I may not. I probably will, just because it might be easier, and we can kind of walk through one of those. So Schedule 2, Health and Safety Code 11055 has the following things listed in it: amphetamine, cocaine, codeine, Demerol, methadone, morphine, opium, phenobarbital, Percodan, and secobarbital. So these are things that are listed in the Schedule 2 area. And again, you can kind of follow through or follow along in your book because it has those schedules spelt out. Schedule 3, 11056 has things like anabolic steroids, barbiturates, depressants, PCP, or what is known as phencyclidine. Stimulants, testosterone and GHB, so FDA approved. And Schedules 4 and 5, HNS 11057 and 11058. So 4 would be the depressants such as barbiturates, tranquilizers are listed in that schedule, and 5 would be compounds containing narcotic and non-narcotic medicinal ingredients are listed in this schedule. So hopefully that kind of again, we're not really talking about what each one of those things do, although I will in a different PowerPoint we'll walk through and we'll talk a little bit about symptomology and things. This is more about law, okay, about the definitions, and maybe we'll talk about things like possession, what constitutes possession, and things like that. So, speak of the devil, controlled substance possession. So what constitutes that? And how do we get to where we want to go as far as the law goes? So one may not legally possess any controlled substance unless it was obtained by a written prescription from a doctor, dentist, podiatrist, or veterinarian licensed to practice in California. Illegal possession is a felony or misdemeanor depending upon the substance possessed. The substance possessed must be in a usable amount to constitute a crime, except for those with certain prior convictions and those who use firearms or commit other crimes. Defendants convicted of simple possession must be sentenced to probation and treatment and generally cannot be incarcerated. Well, there's a section in the Penal Code 1210.1 that talks about drug diversion and the fact that first-time offenders for simple possession need probation, treatment, and what have you. So again, one may not legally possess any controlled substance unless it's by a written prescription from a physician, etc. The substance possessed has to be a usable amount. It can't just be like residue in a package or in a bottle or something like that. And generally, okay, defendants convicted of simple possession are sentenced to probation and treatment and not incarcerated. So now, while some of this has changed, keep in mind that we're gonna go through what the textbook talks about, and then we'll look at the changes in the law probably in a separate little video or PowerPoint. But 11357B of the Health and Safety Code, when we're talking about marijuana, this section makes illegal possession of not more than 28.5 grams or 1 ounce of marijuana an infraction, punishable by a $100 fine. Well, now we know, and I'll put up a little chart maybe in a little bit, that marijuana in a certain amount is okay, not just medically, but also in California recreationally. So if I'm not mistaken, that you can do the less than an ounce personal use at your home. You can actually cultivate up to 6 plants, but again we'll get into that kind of later on. But I wanted you to at least see what the law was at one particular time until things have kind of changed now. Some of this stuff is still going to be okay, but again, I'll throw that chart in. 11357C, those who possess more than 28.5 grams of marijuana shall be punished by imprisonment in the county jail not more than 6 months, so it's an ounce or more. 11357A, those who possess concentrated cannabis shall be punished by imprisonment as a felony wobbler. Now, some of these drugs now that were felonies for simple possession will be misdemeanors, and some of the even amounts that are needed for transportation or enhancements have been lowered by what was known as Proposition 47 in California, which did reduce some crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, and some of the drug crimes were in fact some of those. So medical marijuana as it was before, 11362.5, section 11357 possession and 11358 cultivation shall not apply to a patient or primary caregiver who cultivates for purposes marijuana for medical purposes. well, now we also have the recreational use, okay? Pursuant to a written or oral recommendations of approval by a physician, law enforcement officers must accept medical marijuana cards unless they are believed to be fraudulent. Okay, so again, we'll get back to the marijuana stuff and kind of clean that up a little bit because of some of the law changes. But for now, and I will post. I'm going to post a little chart that shows what the penalties were then, prior to the passage of the new marijuana law, and then what it is now. So even if I don't do a video, I'll post the information so you'll have it. Okay. Elements of possession. So this is the more important stuff that we're getting to now. So in order to prove the commission of the crime of possession under the Health and Safety Code, each of the following 4 elements have to be proven. Okay. Number 1, that a person exercised control over or had the right to exercise control over a certain controlled substance. Second, that such person had knowledge of the presence of the controlled substance. Third, that the person had knowledge of its nature as a controlled substance. And finally, fourth, that the substance was in an amount sufficient to be used as a controlled substance. So, we talked about, not being able to legally possess without a written prescription, etc. Here are the element portions of possession as it relates to the Health and Safety Code. And the law recognizes 2 different types of possession when we're talking about possession. And let me go back because I'm like getting ahead of myself here. So the law recognizes, again, in California, 2 types of possession. Actual possession, which is easy for us to understand because it's a person who knowingly has direct physical control over a thing. It's in your pocket, it's in your jacket, it's in your shoe, it's wherever it is. And the second one being constructive possession, a person who, although not in actual possession, knowingly has the right of control over a thing, either directly through another person or persons like dominion and control. So we have these 2 types, if you will, of possession. So let me kind of go over those again just to kind of make sure that you get it. So 2 types of possession, actual and constructive. Actual, a person who knowingly has direct physical control over a thing, is then actually in possession of it. And then the second one, a person who, although not in actual possession, knowingly has the right of control over a thing, either directly or through another person, is then in constructive possession of it. Now, it is not unlawful for a person to possess controlled substances that have been prescribed for another if, possession is to facilitate delivery of that prescription holder or to discard the substance. So there's a couple sections that talk about that. And the law recognizes that one person may have possession alone, or that 2 or more persons jointly may share actual or constructive possession. So, so a scenario, just to kind of throw it out there. 2 people in a car, they're both in the front seat, driver and the front seat passenger, and you as a law enforcement officer pull them over and you smell marijuana. And even though it's legal, you're not supposed to be like under the influence while you're driving, but you get them out of the car, and right on the seat between both of them is a huge 5-pound, bag of marijuana. So is it possible that both of them could share, constructive possession? So if you talk to them separate and the driver says it's not mine, it's the other guy's, you talk to the other guy and he says it's not mine, it's the driver. These are things that come up within the law, which is why, again, you kind of need to know the ins and outs of things like this. So now let's talk about under the influence, because that kind of goes hand in hand with obviously possession. So we've talked about the possession part. We've talked a little bit about Prop 47. We're going to clear up some of the marijuana stuff in a future or a separate PowerPoint and discussion possibly. But under the influence, so if a controlled substance is what they call appreciably affecting the nervous system, brain, muscles, or other parts of a person's body, or is creating in this person any perceptible or abnormal mental or physical condition, such as a person under the influence of a controlled substance. Okay, so 11550 is that section that you see here under the influence of a controlled substance. It is a misdemeanor to use or be under the influence of many drugs listed in the schedules above, which would have been some of the other schedules that we've already gone through, except authorized by a physician. Some of the more commonly abused drugs will be things like amphetamine, cocaine, codeine, Demerol, heroin, methamphetamine, opium, PCP. Okay, so these are some of the things. Now, this section puts the burden of proof on the defendant to prove that his or her being under the influence was within the law, or an example, administered by or under the direction of a person licensed by the state to dispense, prescribe, or administer controlled substances. So it's that person, the defendant's job, to be able to do that. Now, so you can see that, so there's a section for under the influence of controlled substance, 11550. There's a separate one for being under the influence of toluene, okay, which makes it basically a misdemeanor to be under the influence or possess toluene, which is glue, paint, or similar things for sniffing or inhalants, if you will. And then a subsequent section here underneath that, under the influence of drugs, 647I, I and F. So 647F says that this section is a misdemeanor to be under the influence of any drug, toluene, controlled substance, intoxicating liquor, so we add in alcohol now, or combination of drugs and alcohol in a public place. Okay, the person must be unable to care for his or her own safety or the safety of others. So if you're out there and you've had too much to drink and law enforcement believes that you cannot care for the safety of yourself or others, then you can be taken into custody for that particular section. Now, there's a new section that came into play that I think is very, very important that we hit on, and it's in the Health and Safety Code under 11376.5. Now, it talks about aid for overdose victims. Now, typically, before, if you were under the influence or you were if you overdosed on something, let's just say heroin, let's just go with that. When law enforcement, and medical aid would get there, law enforcement could still charge you for being under the influence of heroin. And if you were with somebody and maybe they had a little bit a little bit of heroin left or something like that, they could prosecute that person, arrest them, and prosecute them as well for that. Well, now this particular section was enacted because of the epidemic of heroin across the United States. Heroin now is one of the leading drugs because it's very, very cheap, but there's really bad heroin out there that's killing a lot of people, and it's super bad on the East Coast, but it's very prevalent in California, even locally in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. Okay, so because of the amount of people that were overdosing and dying from overdoses, a law was basically created, kind of a Good Samaritan type thing, to where you could help those individuals without fear of being arrested. So this section 11376.5, it shall not be a crime for a drug overdose victim or his or her associates, okay, to be under the influence or to possess narcotics or paraphernalia when medical aid is sought for the overdose. What do you think about that? Now, there's a lot of controversy on this because if you get there and you have an OD victim and you have someone that's not OD but they possess narcotics, should they not be arrested and prosecuted? Well, the thought is that they never would have called to help the person that was OD'd because they were worried that they were going to get arrested and prosecuted. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like 50-50. It's good, but it's not good. And furthermore, and I don't believe the textbook covers this, but I'm going to throw that in. There are some experimental places, one in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is actually the first one that was ever done, because of the just heroin epidemic is eating up a lot of these communities. It's a place where people can go and actually shoot up their heroin so they can be watched by other individuals in case they overdose. So they can bring their own heroin in off the street that they purchased that's illegal and shoot up, so that way if they have a reaction to it or OD, they can be helped while they're there. Super controversial. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to post that video, even though I will post some other things to kind of give you a look at what some of the drugs look like. I'm going to post that heroin video about Vancouver, so you can kind of see the issues surrounding that. So again, just, this is why you need to know some of the laws and things like that. All right, so now let's kind of move on a little bit and get off of that that horse and on something different. A lot of different sections, as I said before, and we're not going to go through every one of these sections. I'm going to let you kind of like read through some of those. These sections all talk about transportation for sale or manufacture of certain drugs. So unlawful possession for sale of certain drugs, Health and Safety Code 11351. And and some of these have elements. So 11351, this section makes it a felony to possess for sale or to purchase for sale any narcotic, drug, or certain controlled substance specified in H&S 11054, which is one of those 5 schedules, right? Now, there are some elements and things for possession for sale, just to kind of let you know. This is how you would build your case. In order to prove the commission of the offense possession for sale of a controlled substance, each of the following elements has to prove. So, simple possession would be you have just a little bit. Possession for sale would mean that your intent is to go out and sell it. In order to prove that, here's what you have to have: that the person unlawfully exercised control or had the right to exercise control over a certain controlled substance. 2, that such a person had knowledge of its presence. 3, that such a person had knowledge of its nature as a controlled substance. 4, that the substance was in the amount sufficient to be used for sale. Okay. And 5, that the person possessed the controlled substance with specific intent to sell same. So that's, again, you have to be able to prove those things. So if you had half a pound of cocaine and a couple of gram scales and a bunch of Ziploc baggies with like a half a gram in each Ziploc bag, say there were 10 of them, and then a big pile of the rest of it was there, and a bunch of money, you see how you could build that case into looking like, hey, I think this guy's selling that. So that's how you would do it. And then there's other sections in here. Furnishing nitrous oxide, that's a new one, because we have the section for toluene or sniffing glue or paint. Well, now a lot of people are actually inhaling nitrous oxide at parties, so there's a separate section 381C for that one. Selling drugs on school grounds, and all kinds of different sections that I'm going to have you kind of take a look at. Well, what about, there's real drugs, or what about like fake drugs? Let me go back, because again, I'm like way too fast for myself. There's a section for selling imitation drugs, 11355, or manufacturing or possessing imitation drugs. So again, that's another one that you kind of need to know out there. So it's a felony wobbler to sell any substance in place of a controlled substance leading the buyer to believe that he or she is buying a controlled substance. This section obviously gives the police a weapon to control incidents involving fake drug sales. The suspect cannot escape punishment by claiming that when they sell the talcum powder for heroin, for example, they are not violating the law. So just kind of an interesting thought with some of these sections on how they're used. And then drug paraphernalia. Well, like, what is that? I mean, so we know what drugs are, but what's the paraphernalia? So, used for injection and smoking. So here, H&S 11364, injection and smoking devices. 11364.7, possession of paraphernalia, and drug paraphernalia defined under 11014.5. Well, what is that? Well, so again, kind of interesting. So let's just look at these three real quick. 11364, it is unlawful to possess any device or paraphernalia used for unlawfully injecting or smoking most controlled substances. How about possession of paraphernalia? The law makes it a misdemeanor to possess or manufacture any drug paraphernalia with the intent to deliver, furnish, or transfer it under circumstances where the suspect should reasonably know that the paraphernalia will be used in connection with a controlled substance. So the purpose of this section was to basically control like smoke shops and what we used to call in the olden days growing up head shops. And maybe they still call it that, I don't know. Paraphernalia, drug paraphernalia, what does that like mean? Well, it means like all equipment, products, materials of any kind that are designed for use or marketing for use in planting, propagating, cultivating, growing, harvesting, manufacturing, compounding, injecting, ingesting, inhaling, or otherwise introducing a controlled substance into the human body. So it could be syringes, needles, cocaine spoons, roach clips, controlled substance testing equipment, objects used for ingesting or inhaling or otherwise smoking marijuana, which now, of course, recreationally is legal, cocaine or hash or something like that. So those are all things that are out there. Well, and then that kind of leads us to places where drugs are sold or used. Well, are there sections for those? Well, yeah, you bet there are. 11365, visiting where drugs are used, maintaining a place for drug use, like what they call a shooting gallery, or even false compartments for smuggling. So having these compartments that are there where people smuggle things. So, it's a misdemeanor to knowingly visit or be present. Okay, listen to this. In any room or place where specified controlled substances are being unlawfully smoked or used. It includes such drugs as heroin, mescaline, peyote, opium, and cocaine. It doesn't cover marijuana. Okay. Maintaining a place for using drugs. It's a felony wobbler to open or maintain a place for unlawfully selling, giving away, or using any of the controlled substances specified. Controlled substances covered under this section would include cocaine, heroin, opium, marijuana, peyote, THC, mescaline. This section prohibits what they call crash pads or like shooting galleries. So that's, information on kind of like, where people tend to go to ingest. False compartments in cars real quick. 11366.8, it is a felony to design or install a false compartment in a vehicle with the intent to facilitate drug smuggling. It's a wobbler to use, possess, or control such a false compartment with similar intent. Now, as with some other crimes, if you are convicted of certain crimes under the Health and Safety Code, you will be required to register. Any person convicted of specified narcotics offenses or any person who is discharged or paroled from a penal institution where he or she was confined because of the commission of any such offense, or any person convicted in any other state of any offense which, if committed or attempted in this state, would have been punishable as one or more of the above mentioned offenses, shall within 30 days of his or her coming into any county or city in which he or she resides or is temporarily housed for such a length of time, must register with the chief of police of that city in which he or she resides or the sheriff of the county if he or she resides in an unincorporated area. So just like gang registration, sex registration, arson registration, you also have narcotics registration, where somebody, if they are convicted of certain offenses, they will have to register as a narcotics offender. And then finally, driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. We won't spend too much time on this, but the vehicle code defines any one of the following 3 acts as a misdemeanor offense. Driving a vehicle under the influence of an alcoholic beverage or any drug, or under the combined influence of both. It is also unlawful for any person who has a 0.08% or more by weight of alcohol in his or her blood to drive a vehicle. So that's your BAC, your blood alcohol level. It is unlawful for any person who is addicted to the use of any drug to drive a vehicle. But note, this latter offense does not apply to a person who is participating in a methadone treatment program. And then lastly, it is unlawful for a person with a BAC of 0.04% or more to drive a commercial vehicle. So, again, sections, a lot of them. And remember, I said some were vehicle code sections. So driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs is California Vehicle Code 20-152. It's not a health and safety code. Providing alcohol to a minor driver, that's a business and profession code. So you can see there's a couple of different things there. And all these codes, I'll have you kind of look them all up. Now, at the very end here, what I did supply to you is kind of an overview of certain drugs and where they fall on the California schedule. So you can see the left is the drug, the schedule number is next, the name that it's kind of known as, and then on the right you'll see possession for sale, and use of minor, okay, by a minor. So you'll see the section. So possession of, like, so look at the first one, opium, Schedule 2, the name for it. The simple possession would be a violation of 11-350 of the Health and Safety Code. Does that kind of make sense? So that gives you an idea. So, first one was narcotics. These are depressants. So you can look at the different sections and you can kind of see how they go. I made this for all. Stimulants, hallucinogenics, cannabis. Now some of the sections again have kind of changed a little bit. Okay, so that was a very quick walkthrough of chapter 17. But what I am going to do is I'm going to post a couple of different things. I'm going to post a couple of video links, one to the Vancouver location where they're doing they're allowing people to come into that location, and under supervision they're allowed to shoot up illegal drugs in there, so that way they have people that can help them should they overdose. So there's a video for that. And then I'm also going to do another video presentation, and I will audio over the top of it, where I'll walk you through another PowerPoint, basically just showing you some pictures of different drugs and telling you what they are, and walking through a couple of different effects that these drugs might have on your body. Again, this isn't a real big drug abuse type course. It's more the law, but I want you to get a good idea of some of the things that we talked about, so that will probably help add some context. So I will make sure that I get those things posted and up for you to view as well. So if you have any questions at all, please again post it on the discussion board, and that will be the end of chapter 17. And if I'm not mistaken, this is very close to the end of the entire semester. So the next thing that you will probably hear will be a review for your final exam, which I actually will narrate, and we'll kind of go through some of the questions that you might be asked on your final exam. So until we talk again.